Welcome to episode 10 of Beyond the Blood. Before we begin this episode, a few notes. I have launched on Patreon. As many of you know, I have a full-time career as a law enforcement officer. This limits the amount of hours I can spend dedicated to this podcast. Every contribution on Patreon helps. To find me on Patreon, just go to www.patreon.com/beyondtheblood. I'm satisfied in creating a podcast that people enjoy. My main goal was never to make money, and this podcast will go on with or without a contribution. However, I want to thank Troy Stillwell. This person suggested I create a Patreon, and this is my very first contributor. A big thank you to him. Troy, I appreciate it very much. I'll be at CrimeCon this year in Indianapolis. Where's the TimeCon? June 9th through the 11th. I'll be there in addition with so many other great podcasters. Thinking Sideways, True Crime All the Time, Generation Y, and so many more. Come on out to Indy next week. Now, on with the show.
Detectives are piecing together the final brutal moments of Seth Jackson's life.
The local teen was beaten, shot, mutilated, burned into ashes, and his remains sunk to the bottom of a local quarry.
West 2's Kendra A. with the late-breaking details tonight from Marion County.
Lead detectives tell West 2 News they believe they know where the murder weapon has been hidden, but right now they are not telling us whether it has been found. Crime scene techs wrapped up scouring the property here for evidence where they say 15-year-old Seth Jackson was viciously murdered.
That's just ruthless.
Friends of 15-year-old Seth Jackson continue to visit his memorial. Cars pass by the Summerfield house where the teen met a violent end. Investigators say he was lured to the home by former girlfriend, ninth grader Amber Wright, then attacked, shot, and burned. Detectives say Wright's new boyfriend, Michael Bargo, is the mastermind behind the killing.
Potentially you are facing the death penalty.
Bargo faced a judge with a gash on his eye and forehead. Investigators tell West 2 News he had the cuts when they arrested him. The suspects tell police the victim tried to run from the home after Bargo shot him and was still alive even after the group dragged him into the bathtub and broke his kneecaps to stuff him in a sleeping bag. Friends believe he fought for his life.
Seth was a little fighter. I hope Seth messed them all up.
Right now, Bargo and the teen accused of grabbing the victim as he tried to run, Justin Soto, are on suicide watch at the jail.
Maybe he wants to actually die so he doesn't have to remember anything.
Crime scene techs wrapped up sifting through evidence focused on a bin in the backyard near the fire pit. Even experienced detectives are shaken, as those close to Seth Jackson.
That's hard to believe, isn't it? That you could get 5 people together that would think that was a good idea. It's still unbelievable to me.
Who gave them the right to take somebody's life? Who made them God? Nobody did.
Right now, Wright and her brother remain in juvenile detention. Their stepdad, accused of helping to cover up the crime, has been released on bond. The 4 suspects charged as adults will be back in court May 24th. In Marion County, Kendra A. West 2 News.
Gilchrist County 911, what's the address of the emergency?
Yes, ma'am. I just shot my daughter and shot all my grandkids, and I'll be sitting on my step, and then when you get here, I'm going to shoot myself.
You will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing, Nancy Park.
Do you admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil in some form or another, are we not?
All crimes have a motive. Go beyond the blood and discover the reasoning behind the darkest crimes in history.
This episode takes us back to Florida, Marion County, Florida, in a minor, unincorporated section of the county known as Summerfield, a little more than an hour north of Orlando. A love triangle and teens collide in a plot of murder. This case differs in many ways from the Lords of Chaos and has the makings of a Hollywood movie. Even a lawyer for one of the convicted calls the act, quote, pretty damn depraved, end quote. It truly is tragic to talk about lives thrown away at such a young age. It's horrific to describe the murder of Seth Jackson encountered at the hands of Michael Bargo, Amber Wright, Justin Soto, Charlie Ely, and Kyle Hooper. Eventually, sheriff deputies would uncover the plot. These young people did not gather to take part in a rumor mill or to flirt. They gathered to take part in a vicious act of retribution and hate. To understand the crimes and the motive, we must explore the backgrounds of not only the victims, but of the culprits. Seth Jackson, only 15 years old, from another part of the county, and Amber Wright, just 15 herself, reportedly had a romantic relationship that ended badly and publicly on Facebook for their friends to witness. In early March of 2011, he wrote, "Love you, Amber," on his Facebook wall, but by April 7th, he was calling her a slut. A public battle began on Facebook. On April 8th, when Wright wrote on Jackson's page, "I got so tired of you treating me like I was nothing. If you're so perfect, why don't you get over your jealousy and get a new girl you can hurt? You know I care deeply about you. I stuck with you through a lot of stuff. It takes a real man to accept the fact he got broken up with." Jackson responded, "We both need to just let all of this go. Yeah, we split. Yeah, it hurt, but I'm over it. I'm just not gonna let Mike have his cake and eat it too." Mike was Michael Bargo, Amber's new boyfriend, and he was about to take their bickering to a completely new and deadly level. Seth did not think Mike was good enough for Amber, and Michael, 18, developed a hatred for Seth that led to a truly cruel act. In fact, the hatred between Jackson and Bargo became so intense that at one point it was reported Jackson stood in front of Bargo's parents' home raising Cain, threatening to burn the house down and threatening to kill people. If you ask Bargo, he might play the rift down between himself and Seth, saying he had only met Seth on 2 previous occasions. Charlie Ely, perhaps the one person who was brought into the murder plot by coincidence and a string of bad luck, but still played a role, was only 18 when she took part in the crime, struggling to pay her monthly rent and fighting off the battle of loneliness since her husband's arrest. This is how the state and the defense described Charlie at trial. This battle against loneliness is what spurred her to open her Summerfield home to Michael and the others convicted in the murder. Although both the state and defense described her as struggling after her husband's arrest, they differed on the role she played in the murder. Prosecutors described her as an active participant. Her defense counsel characterized her as a pawn caught up in Bargo's plan of murder. In 2010, Ely would meet her future husband, Joseph Burham, online. When the two fell in love, this prompted her to move to Florida from Maryland to be with him. A few months after the wedding, he was in jail, and Ely was on her own in the unfamiliar Marion County. She then asked a friend, Megan Abney, to move in with her. Megan's boyfriend soon joined them at the residence. Soon after that, the other individuals charged in Jackson's death found a place inside Ely's home. Michael Bargo, Justin Soto, Kyle Hooper, and Amber Wright. Soto was the first to find his way into Ely's home. He had known Megan's boyfriend for years. Typically, he would sleep on the sofa, and at times, he would sleep in the bed with Megan and her boyfriend. After Soto, Bargo would join the group inside the home. Eventually, Megan and her boyfriend would manage to move out of the Summerfield home. Rumors have it that Bargo pointed a .22 caliber revolver at her and her boyfriend before the move. Prosecutors would allege that this revolver was the same one used to execute Seth Jackson. Finally, brother and sister, Amber and Kyle, would arrive at Ely's house. Trace Wright, Amber's mother, acknowledged that her daughter would stay at the home in Summerfield for 2 or 3 days out of each week. Kyle would move into the house only a week before the murder, according to Trace. These 4 took over that house. They were a clique. My client was not a part of that clique, said Jonathan Bull, Charlie's defense attorney, during his opening statement. Christian Samalot, who briefly dated Ely, testified that he broke off the relationship in part because of Mike, who would often flaunt the revolver. It was around his waist or on Ely's windowsill, Samalot said. I didn't like him, so I stayed away. On April 17th, 2011, Seth's former friends, Amber Wright, 15 years old, and her new boyfriend, 18-year-old Mike Bargo, 20-year-old Justin Soto, 18-year-old Charlie Ely, and 16-year-old Kyle Hooper, met in the evening at Charlie's house, which he shared with Bargo and Soto. The discussion quickly turned to Seth Jackson. Bargo, who has a single tattooed teardrop below each eye, spoke about his hatred for Seth. The conversation turned into a plot to kill Seth. Before the group reached out to Seth, the group built a massive bonfire in the backyard. Amber and Charlie called and left several text messages for Seth to meet with Amber. They finally met him outside the house while Bargo and Kyle hid in a spare bedroom. However, Amber and Charlie went back into the house without Seth. According to a statement that Kyle gave to the police, Mike was infuriated and demanded that Amber and Charlie bring Seth to the house. Amber then texted Seth on his cell phone, who shortly arrived and enticed him inside the house so the scheme could be carried out. When Seth entered the house, Mike and Kyle instantaneously exited the room where they were hiding and bum rushed him. Hooper and Justin Soto struck him with a wooden object. Mike then flaunted a .22 caliber revolver and shot Seth at least 4 times. Seth tried to flee, but Justin Soto tackled and without emotion restrained him, then struck him with an axe handle. Bargo told Justin to get out of the way, according to the report, and continued to shoot Jackson. They then took his sluggish body to a bathroom tub. Mike broke his kneecaps with a metal object to be able to put his body into a sleeping bag, but at some point they comprehended that Seth was still alive. Mike put another bullet into his body, then was able to successfully hog tie him and shove him inside a sleeping bag. They then placed Seth into the fire that was already burning for the purpose of cremating him. Amber Wright told the police that she helped to clean up the blood in the house with bleach while the body was reduced to ash. Kyle told the police that Mike used a shovel to scrape the ashes out of the fire pit and into several 5-gallon paint cans. They then stored the paint cans on the property, where Mike later took them to an abandoned lime quarry. Neighbors told a local television station they saw the bonfire and heard the gunshots, but mistook it for kids being kids who were playing with firecrackers. On April 18th, the day after Seth's murder, his parents filed a missing persons report explaining that he may have run away. They had no contact with him since the day of his murder. The next day, Tracy, Amber and Kyle's mother took Kyle to the sheriff's office after Kyle told her he personally witnessed Seth's murder. Police arrested the teens involved, including Amber Wright and Kyle Hooper's stepfather, James Haven III, who was aware of the murder plot all along, according to the police. While he didn't help with the actual slaying, detectives say he helped the kids shovel Seth's remains into 5-gallon cans, which were thrown in a flooded lime pit. Kyle proved to be a key witness for the state. He told investigators upon his arrest he believed the .22 caliber revolver was stored in an air duct outside the bathroom at Charlie's house. He further told the police that he witnessed Seth being struck in the head multiple times with a shovel and where the shovel could be located. Kyle told authorities that Mike had a list of 8 people he wanted to kill, including 15-year-old Seth Jackson. Kyle Hooper did not name names while telling Marion County detectives about Mike's alleged list during an interview. Charlie was interviewed by detectives with the sheriff's office, informing them that she knew of the conspiracy to kill Seth prior to the attack. Her role in the plot, along with Amber, was to lure Seth into the residence so the murder could be carried out. However, when Seth first arrived at the house, according to reports, the trio had a disagreement and Seth left. When Seth finally returned to the residence after a flurry of texts by Amber, Charlie went on to detail how she witnessed Kyle striking Seth in the head with some sort of object when he entered her home. At that point, she claims she ran into her bedroom and heard a couple of gunshots fired inside her home, followed by more gunshots outside the home. She denied helping to clean the crime scene with bleach, dispose of Seth's remains, or destruction of any additional evidence. Amber admitted being an active player to investigators. Her role throughout the interview with police painted her as one who participated in the planning, execution, and the cleanup following the horrific crime. She admitted that she did help lure Seth to the house and ultimately admitted to witnessing the murder. Amber confessed to aiding in the cleaning of Charlie's house to help destroy and conceal evidence. When authorities confronted Justin Soto, he initially denied any knowledge of the murder. After the other co-defendants implicated him, he admitted he knew of the plot to kill the teen and that he agreed to take part in the murder. Justin stated that he observed Seth walk into the home, and he then witnessed Mike and Kyle exit the spare bedroom and begin to beat on him. At some point, he saw Seth about to escape the house of horrors. Justin, in his own words, then said he grabbed an axe handle and struck Seth in order to prevent him from escaping. Mike then shouted for Justin to move out of the way, and when he did, Mike shot Seth 4 times with a .22 caliber black in color revolver, the same type of revolver many people testified seeing Mike flaunt in the past. Soto then went on to say he helped Mike place Seth into a bathtub after Seth suffered the gunshots. He witnessed Mike try to break Seth's kneecaps to stuff his remains in a sleeping bag. Eventually, the police would discover Seth's remains in a lime pit. Through their investigation, police discovered that Mike was the only person in the group who knew how to reach the lime pit in Ocala, Florida. With the help of Justin and James Haven, Kyle's stepdad, the trio disposed of Seth's remains. Mike learned about the police investigation when Tracy Wright phoned James and told him that the police were at their house. The police had come looking for Seth and wanted to speak with Mike, Kyle, and Amber. After James spoke with Tracy, James and Mike picked up Kyle from work and told him about the police investigation. Mike would ask Kyle for money so that he could get out of town. Eventually, Mike would be dropped off by James at an ex-girlfriend's house in Stark, Florida. Eventually, Kyle would go to Mike's house and inform Mike's father and grandmother about the situation. After stopping at Mike's house, Kyle would reluctantly return to his mother's house and witness police searching his residence. Police would subsequently arrest Amber, Ely, and Justin and obtain search warrants for Ely's house, the Ocala lime pit, and Mike's room inside his grandmother's house. Police recovered a Heritage gun box and a spent .22 caliber cartridge when searching Mike's bedroom at his grandmother's house. At Ely's house, police would uncover drag marks, a fire pit, and a pressure washer on the front porch. An initial search of the fire pit turned up not only bullet fragments, but also human remains. Inside Ely's house, investigators found a fully loaded .22 caliber revolver and 2 containers of live ammunition. The search of the lime pit revealed shoe impressions and circular bucket rings in the sand and dirt along the path leading to the pit. Police agents also found a bucket with a plastic bag attached to it floating in the pit. Dive teams would eventually arrive at the quarry, and when the search resumed, police found 5-gallon bucket lids and 2 more 5-gallon buckets underwater attached to cinder blocks by wires. Pieces of suspected charred human remains were found inside the buckets at the bottom of the body of water. DNA would come to establish that those remains were that of Seth Jackson. This ended the search for the missing teen with the worst possible outcome. Forensic expert Dr. Michael Warren testified that he found projectiles in the remains. Firearm experts with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement tested the projectile found in Seth's remains and concluded it to have been a .22 caliber. Due to the condition of the bullet, there was not enough of an agreement on whether the bullet came from the .22 caliber revolver Mike owned. DNA evidence showed a mixture of Charlie's DNA in a mixture in the bathroom and a mixture of Kyle's DNA in that of Seth's in the living room and Mike's DNA in blood found in the kitchen. Investigators would discover Mike had confessed to the murder to several people before his capture. He spared no details in his confession to friends, stating, quote, "I took pliers and pulled his teeth out one by one," end quote. Once in custody, Mike also confessed to a cellmate, William Faulkner, stating that he killed a kid who raped his girlfriend.
Takes the stand late this afternoon in the Michael Bargo murder trial and says Bargo made a chilling admission in a Marion County holding cell. West Tuesday McDaniel is live in Ocala, where the trial is now on its 4th day. And Dave, what was said?
Well, as witness said a couple of years ago, he had come back to Florida to turn himself in on a misdemeanor warrant. And he said on that particular day, he was placed in the same holding cell with Michael Bargo.
Okay, and what did he tell you happened to his face?
He just said, well, when I was burning that kid Seth's body, you know, I threw a paint can in and it blew up in my face.
William Faulkner's description of what he says Michael Bargo told him is nearly exactly the state's theory of this case. That a feud between 15-year-old Seth Jackson and Bargo, because they had an interest in the same teenage girl, led to a plot to lure Seth to the home in Summerfield in 2011, where the state says Seth was beaten, shot, his body burned, the remains dumped in a limestone pit.
He said he hit him over the back of the head with a 2x4, and then they lifted him up, put him in a recliner, and then started basically, you know, talking trash to him. And then he said when he was tired of it, you know, he pulled out a gun, just shot him 3 times in the recliner. So I guess they took the body from the bathtub once he was dead and bring him outside behind the house, and that's where they tried to burn the body.
The defense worked to discredit the witness as someone possibly seeking attention, suggesting he heard about the facts and made up the conversation.
Did he say anything?
The man said he heard the victim was only 15 years old, and that coming forward, even though it was a couple weeks later, was the right thing to do.
a corrections officer would testify that he overheard Mike state that there were only 2 witnesses who saw the murder. Ultimately, Mike would testify at his own trial at the request of his attorney, Charles Holloman. During his testimony, Mike denied being at Ely's house at the time of the murder, but admitted to help disposing of the remains at the rock quarry. He claimed at the time of the murder, he was walking to an ex-girlfriend's house and was unaware of the plot. Mike also went on to say that he had been attacked by Justin and Kyle before leaving to visit his girlfriends. Mike recalls the attack was over a confrontation dealing with Kyle's drug usage, to include methamphetamine, and Mike's revolver, which he claimed had gone missing. After the fight, he claimed he showered and tended to his wounds and searched for his missing gun before drinking several beers. Mike never made it to his ex-girlfriend's house that night. He claimed that after drinking so many beers, he became sick on his way to her house. He said he threw up and decided to walk back to Ely's residence. Mike would explain the reason he decided not to finish the trip to his ex-girlfriend's house as, quote, she had school tomorrow, she's got to be up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, it's like 11:30, it's late, there's no way I'm going to be able to get to that house before, like 12 o'clock, and even if I do, I'm going to be smelling like puke and beer and cigarettes, I'm trying to avoid all that, end quote. Mike claimed that when he arrived back at Charlie's house, he found Justin standing by the door. Charlie was scrubbing the floor with bleach, and Amber sitting on the couch, drinking from a bottle of liquor and crying. At trial, Mike said that he found all of this dumbfounding. Mike testified that he went directly to his bedroom and was approached by Justin, who told Mike he had his gun, but that Mike needed to talk to Kyle before he could give it back to him. He claimed that he went into the backyard and found a huge fire pit and saw Kyle next to the fence talking to neighbors who were concerned about the size of the fire. Mike testified that he and Charlie joined Kyle's conversation with the neighbors and that he agreed with the neighbor that the fire was too big and assured them that he would put a hose to the fire if it did not go down in the next 5 minutes. Mike went on to testify that he returned to his bedroom after discussing the fire with neighbors and spoke with Kyle, who confessed to Mike that he had killed Jackson. Mike said that Seth's body was already in the fire when he arrived back at Charlie's. Mike testified that he freaked out upon hearing Kyle's story and mentioned calling the cops, but Kyle threatened to blame the murder on him if he called the cops, stating, "You're going to help us or you're against us." Mike said that he told Kyle that he could not help until he sobered up, and he suggested that everyone sober up and figure things out in the morning. He went on to explain that he woke up the next morning around 10:30 a.m. and found Amber, Charlie, Justin, and Kyle in the living room having a discussion. Kyle had to go to work, so Mike, Amber, and Kyle walked to Tracy Wright's house. Tracy Wright drove Kyle to work, and Mike and Amber accompanied them for the drive. When they returned, Amber and Mike initially went into Tracy Wright's house, but Amber started cracking up around her mom and was on the verge of tears that whole day, so Amber and him went back to Charlie's house. Mike said that he found Justin pressure washing the front steps when he and Amber returned to Charlie's house. Amber then texted James Haven, her and Kyle's stepdad, and told Mike that Haven was on his way to Ely's house. Haven arrived at Charlie's house and agreed to drive the co-defendants to the quarry. Bargo testified, "I had James back the truck up to the dumpster." Then Justin got into the dumpster and started handing out gray buckets with lids on them, 5-gallon buckets, to James Havens, and he takes them and sets them in the back of the truck. I grab a couple of cinder blocks, and there's a red dog leash. We put that in the back of the truck. Mike, Justin, and James then drove to Kyle's workplace to get gas money from him, and then Mike helped James navigate to the quarry. The roadway to the quarry was blocked by a mound, which required the 3 men to proceed on foot. Mike carried a cinder block, the red dog leash. James carried a bucket and a cinder block, and Justin carried 2 buckets. While walking a sugar sand road leading to the quarry, Mike testified that the group had to stop to rest 4 times because of his injured knee. When the group reached the fence, Mike told James and Justin that he cannot get over the fence, and told them that the water in the quarry is deepest near the cliff face. Bargo testified, "I've actually swam down and touched the bottom. It's fairly deep." Justin and James climbed the fence. Mike handed the buckets and the cinder blocks over to them, and Justin and James headed towards the water. Mike heard splashes. Then Justin and James returned and headed back to Charlie's house. After Mike's arrest, Dr. Greg Pritchard, psychologist, evaluated him. In Pritchard's opinion, he was not psychotic, suffering from delusional thinking, or experiencing disorganized thinking at the time of the murder. In addition, Mike's medical records did not indicate any history of psychosis or history of delusions. The defense would call Wright's mother, Tracy Wright. Tracy Wright testified that Mike and Amber were good friends, but she was not aware of their relationship being anything more than friends. When Amber broke up with Seth, people posted things on Facebook that made Mike mad and Amber upset. Amber was crying a lot. Tracy Wright believed Bargo was always in fights because she saw him with injuries, but she never saw Bargo fighting. Dwayne Hooper, Kyle Hooper's father, testified he has known Mike for about 6 or 8 years. Mike spent a lot of time at his home, and Dwayne taught him tattooing. He was always respectful to Dwayne. Dwayne treated him like one of his own kids. However, in the spring of 2011, Dwayne became uncomfortable around him and did not want him around his kids, which created issues with his children. Mike never threatened Dwayne after his arrest. Dwayne learned from the state that he was on the list that Mike had created, aka Mike's hit list. During a 10-minute hearing, Circuit Judge David Eddy read a 21-year-old Michael Bargo's death sentence. Bargo was the last of 5 defendants to be sentenced for the murder of Seth Jackson. It is a judgment of the law and the sentence of the court for the premeditated murder of Seth Jackson. You, Michael Shane Bargo, are to be sentenced to death, Eddy said.
Bargo sat stoic in the courtroom.
You, Michael Shane Bargo, are sentenced to death.
He didn't even flinch when the judge sentenced him to death for the 2011 murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson. Investigators say Bargo and 4 others lured Jackson to a home, beat him, shot him to death, burned and dismembered his body, then dumped the remains, all because of a dispute over a girl. The judge called it the most cold and calculated murder he's ever seen.
The death penalty is not only justified, it is the only appropriate sentence based on the evidence and the law of the state of Florida.
Seth Jackson's family decided not to go to court today. Bargo's grandmother broke down crying, and his family didn't want to talk as they left court. But his attorney pointed blame at Jackson, saying he was a violent person who made plenty of threats.
To burn their house down, to rape them, to shoot them.
Jurors didn't get to hear about that, and she believes it will be part of his automatic appeal to the state Supreme Court. She also feels Bargo's age should have spared his life. He was 18 at the time of the murder. But the judge didn't see it that way, and he agreed with the jurors that Michael Bargo deserves to die.
The defendant shall be taken by the proper authorities to the Florida State Prison and there be kept under close confinement until the date of his execution.
Bargo's attorney said they will gather up all the transcripts and the materials from the case and hand them over to the public defender's office. An attorney from that office will file the appeal with the state Supreme Court. Reporting from the Marion County Courthouse, Jeff Deal, Channel 9 Eyewitness News.
I don't want to die, man. I really don't. I was 18 years old, man, said Mike. Bargo's father and other family members comforted his grandmother as she broke down crying when the judge read the sentence. At the age of 21, Mike Bargo was the youngest inmate sitting on Florida's death row at Union Correctional Institution. Amber Wright, the cold-hearted teen who lured Seth to his savage and grotesque death, was found guilty at her original trial. She was granted a second trial because she wasn't read her Miranda rights correctly, but the verdict was the same. Amber's attorney, Junior Barrett, tried to sway the jury, arguing that the freckle-faced teen did not know Michael was going to take things to that level. Amber, for her role, remains at Homestead Correctional Institution. Kyle Hooper was sentenced to life in prison without parole, the judge calling it the coldest case he had ever seen. Kyle Hooper spoke at his sentencing, telling the judge and Seth Jackson's family how sorry he was for killing his sister's ex-boyfriend at Charlie's home. I know it may not help bring him back in any way, but I'm sorry, said Kyle. Kyle currently spends his days at Century Correctional Institution.
A pair of siblings who killed a 15-year-old learned their fate.
A judge sentenced 17-year-old Kyle Hooper and his sister Amber Wright to life in prison. The two were found guilty of beating, shooting, and burning the body of 15-year-old Seth Jackson. Wright and Hooper were part of a plot to kill Jackson in Marion County last year. West 2's Michelle Meredith has been in the courtroom for the hearing and the sentencing. She's live in Ocala with the very latest. Michelle.
Well, just 30 minutes ago, the judge sentenced 16-year-old Amber Wright to life in prison. She chose not to speak on her own behalf, refused to look at pictures of Seth Jackson that were put on the screen. In the same courtroom hours earlier, her brother, Kyle Hooper, got the same sentence. At today's sentencing, Seth Jackson's parents sat on one side of the courtroom. The family of Amber Wright and Kyle Hooper sat on the other. Kyle Hooper's family described him as a good person who was gullible, easily led. His mom broke down.
He's a follower.
Seth Jackson's mother took the stand, said her pain could not be described, that Kyle was once Seth's friend, that Seth's murder was not an accident, it was planned.
After being beaten and shot several times, Seth still managed to run outside where Kyle again made a choice to continue with the plan and bring Seth back inside, knowing he would not live.
The family showed baby pictures of Seth. Kyle Hooper himself took the stand. He was soft-spoken, apologized.
I know it may not help or bring him back in any way, but I am sorry.
But the judge wasted no time handing down the sentence, life in prison with no intent of parole.
This case is the single most cold, calculated, premeditated case of murder that I have ever seen.
Kyle's family was upset. Tracy, can I get your reaction?
Get away from me.
Your son has been sentenced to life.
I understand this.
Your reaction to that?
Well, it's hard. I mean, what can I say?
Now, the attorneys for both the defendants argued that their clients were just children and did not deserve life in prison, but clearly the judge did not agree. Live in Marion County, Michelle Meredith, West 2 News.
For his role in the murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson, Justin Soto pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and will spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justin is currently housed at the Columbia Correctional Institution. Charlie Ely was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for her role in the death of Seth Jackson. Before the sentence was imposed by Circuit Judge David Eddy, Seth's mother addressed the court and Charlie. Some say your life is over, but you will still see and talk to your family. You will still get letters and birthday cards. You will still laugh and cry, Sonia Jackson said, never looking towards Charlie. Jackson spoke softly, her words sometimes hard to hear. I have no sympathy for the tears you shed. They have not been for Seth, but rather for what's happened to you, she said. You could have been a hero and saved many lives. Eddie then sentenced the 19-year-old woman to spend the rest of her life in prison and imposed a $5,000 fine. Charlie can be found at the Lowell Annex. A judge ruled that James Havens was not legally competent to stand trial for allegedly helping cover up the murder of Jackson and will have to undergo treatment. 2 psychologists who examined Havens determined that he was not legally competent to stand trial. The judge determined that the case would not be able to proceed because of Havens' competency. The lives lost, death, and prison, a teenage love triangle that came to a tragic end. The motive for the murder was evident: love and revenge, with a dash of peer pressure. The evidence against Michael Bargo was too great to overcome. From the jailhouse confessions, to the statement against him by his co-defendants and an alibi that cannot be verified. The jailhouse witnesses had never met Mike or Seth. In fact, Mike showed little doubt that his own .22 caliber weapon was the one used to shoot Seth. Given the fact Mike was captured in Stark, Florida, it's clear to me that he attempted to flee after getting wind about the police heat. Juries nowadays love DNA. And when they found Mike's DNA and blood inside the kitchen at Charlie's house, this left little doubt that Mike, despite his claims, was actually present during the time of the murder. Everyone played a role, and everyone deserved the punishment they received. The only person who was innocent was Seth. Whether or not Seth irritated Michael Bargo by standing outside of his house and yelling obscenities or threats, that's no reason to plot the murder of a 15-year-old child. These individuals will now suffer the fate that they chose for the acts that they committed. Did you enjoy this week's episode? Be sure to leave us a review on iTunes. Also, find me on Twitter at BeyondBloodPC. And of course, like everyone else, we're on Facebook at Beyond the Blood. Thank you for listening to another episode of Beyond the Blood. I'm Earthen Brown, and remember, every crime has a motive.